I came down with my wife on one of our trips, and we spent a weekend here and looked at each other and said, "We got to go do this."
Yeah.
And from that moment, it was just,
Right.
it was super easy. And from the moment I came down here, it's been phenomenal. I
Yeah.
mean, it's been great. It's been an 8-year love affair.
Yeah.
So on that same vein, we talk about culture and leadership a lot. What is it like coming into an established business like Crow, 77 years now? Do you bring your own leadership, or or in your own culture, or do you need to fit the mold of what's already been here and the legacy that's already been laid ground?
Since I wasn't here for most of those 70 plus years, I guess I would say with hindsight, Harlan and the leadership team must have seen in me culturally a great fit. There's no way that they didn't. There's no way that I would have been invited to be here if they didn't see in me. Did I fully understand that at the time? I couldn't. Because even though I had gotten to know the company and the team, you're still an outsider kind of looking in. And so it looks like it's a fit, but you can't really tell. But they knew that who I was as a person fit the culture of this place. So no, I didn't change myself. The environment around me changed dramatically, but the human that I am and the person that I am and the style that I have and the approach that I take every day hasn't changed since I came here. I didn't change my suit and all of a sudden change my behavior. They just saw a person who fit with this place and this culture. And then when I joined, I've said this before, but my most important rule, certainly in the beginning of my career and still to this day, is do no harm. Don't do anything to break this incredible storied, American business icon. And but I think culturally I fit already.
Yeah, because one of the notes I was writing was like, do you just, when you join an organization like this, do you just, if you just hold on and try to steer, or do you just try to nudge?
There were two things in my life. One was my experiences before, primarily at Morgan Stanley. And two was instinct, which was working at a large financial services company. And I had worked for almost 25 years. I started at Prudential Securities. I worked for a little while at Salomon Brothers, and I spent almost 20 years at Morgan Stanley. I would watch in the middle of night restructurings take place, memos take place. The new person comes in, they've got all the bright ideas, they're going to bring their team, they slatch the old people, they come up with a business plan, then in 2 years they don't succeed and they get turned over and turned over and turned over. And I had been put in those positions in my own career to go in there in 90 days, let's have the business plan and you'll restructure things and move things forward. And I realized how much damage gets done through that kind of behavior. And so I knew when I joined that would be the last thing that I would focus on. And the first thing that I would focus on is shut my mouth and keep my ears wide open and learn and listen. And you have an organization that's been this successful for 70 plus years, you need to step back and learn and listen. And so I had the luxury and the privilege to do that for the first year or two, because it was a well-run organization. Harlan was running it with Ann Raymond and other people at that point in time. And so I didn't have to step into a broken company. I didn't have to step into a big vacuum or a void. And it gave me the time to listen and to learn.
Where does that come from? Because if you come from this history of slashing and cutting and changing from the get-go, did somebody plant a bug in your ear? It's like, hey, you're coming to a completely different environment. Just pause and listen.
I just knew from my own experiences.
Okay.
My first week on the job in 1994, when I got done with training in investment banking, I walked into the 18th floor of the One New York Plaza for Prudential Securities, and they laid off 25% of the floor in a single day. And I realized very quickly, okay, that's the way it works here. Right. And what you watch is that just creates a mercenary culture. This doesn't mean that the people are bad, incredibly bright, incredibly talented, incredibly capable. But the relationship between the people who work in the organizations and the company itself is one of a mercenary relationship. And that's something that never really appealed to me. My whole career has been about the bonds I've built with the people that I've worked with, fighting the fight, and ultimately the love that builds and the friendships that built by working with people. And that always appealed to me. And so I spent my whole career in that environment, but it never appealed to me. That sensibility never appealed to me. And so when I joined, that would never have been what I thought. My first thing was, how do I figure out how the business works, who the people are, what's the history, and build relationships with people.
It's interesting that you put it in terms of mercenaries, because when I, at least anecdotally outside looking in, I see what's being built here or what has been built here, I would never, ever think mercenary. I would think established, legacy, wealth, stable,
Patient,
concrete,
thoughtful.
patience. But like, so it goes back to this conversation of New York, Texas, Wall Street, Crow.
There is nothing, look, the world's a big place, right? And the way people do business in Beijing versus Tokyo versus Sydney, Australia and so, you need to understand culture around the world. But yes, relative to New York and the world I came from, that was a much more transactional business. The nature of the business, yes, the institutional relationships are there and the personal relationships matter, but people move around so much. And so it, for a variety of reasons, creates more of a transactional environment amongst the different institutions. And one, they get so large at some level, it becomes difficult to have a relationship with an institution that has 100,000 people. The relationships, but that person you have a relationship is one of 100,000 people with 6 committees sitting between them and the final decision. And so it's just a different dynamic. And down here, we have much less of that. We have more of it as more of the world's largest companies are coming to Dallas, right? And fewer private families and other private businesses are making up the mosaic of the financial services, industries that are down here. But it's definitely a different head that you bring to the table.
You speak about that in a quote from D Magazine interview. You said, "I don't sit around with Harlan and talk about profitability and returns. We talk about doing the right thing." That certainly would appear to be somewhat of a contrast to the Wall Street mentality. Can you give us an example of where that intersection is of profitability and doing the right thing?
Look, I think if you work for a public company, for the most part, I know there are exceptions, so these generalizations are probably too broad, but if you work for a public company, you know the one thing that matters, stock price, right? And therefore, you probably know the one thing that matters is earnings that quarter. And you probably know the business at the end of the day is all built around stock price and earnings. And that's the hallowed ground of that institution. If your firm is owned by a private equity firm, you know that IRR clock is the hallowed ground. You know that's what everybody's solving for. You might work for a partnership with lots of different people, or it might be a small partnership, a big partnership, and the culture of that partnership will decide what the holy grail of the partnership is. You also can work for an individual or family, and their goals and objectives are what's going to define how that company or that organization is driven by. It is possible that a family or a private institution is going to drive you towards a quarterly earnings objective or some other near-term financial metric. And if you don't meet those metrics, not only financially perhaps less better off, but culturally it may be really bad for you. The Harlan and the Crow family take a very different approach to the business. And I think it's his dad. Unfortunately, I never met his dad, but I think it was a very different business model. It was never about the entity, the company making a certain amount of money. It was entering into formal partnerships and informal partnerships with the people that work with you, not for you, the people that work with you in your organization, in aligned structures that if they do well, you do well. And so we have an organization built around that concept of sharing. And so when you look at our senior leadership team and the people in the different roles, they have the entrepreneurial motivation to go out there and create opportunity, right, for themselves and for the company. And so we're just the net beneficiaries of that. And so I don't sit there from the center and say, okay, our earnings target this year is X dollars. I know that we're doing business in a certain way. We can look at what's likely to happen with the resources we have on the table, with the investments that we have teed up, and we'll know generally where things may be going over the next 2 years, but we won't be driving to that overall corporate financial outcome. So we try and make good strategic decisions in areas of secular growth. We try and bring on great human beings who are very capable at what they do, and we put in place aligned economic structures between themselves and the company. And that's something that Trammell put in place 77 years ago. And of course, there's been tweaks and changes to the structures over the years, but that prevails to this day. And so, no, I don't have to sit there and say, we're we're not going to meet profits this year, Harlan, and we got some problems, so we need to do a RIF and lay
Yeah.
people off. That never happens here.